Welcome to another episode of Paradise After Dark. We're going to be doing the English version for my Americanas, my girls with the English dialect, the girls that learned English to communicate with the world. Yes, ma'am. We're here outside. It's Friday. It's literally just a rainy day. I was going to film outside, girl, and it started raining, and I'm like, okay, ASMR moment. You already know. We already have we're going to be talking about Mother Venus. And I have 7 slides full of tea. I have 7 slides that go over the goddess, the muse, the primordial mother, and the archetype of the divine sacred feminine. You already know that this is in celebration of my zine. Mami Literal, I live. It's been so amazing. And I want to thank all the dolls that have supported it, all the dolls that have came through and just uplifted the work, uplifted a new form of astrology in the community, a form that's accessible, open, and rooted in tradition and history, which is something that Mama, you might not have expected from the doll, the banji, ta 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 ta. She's gonna kiki, she's gonna do all that. But one thing she's also going to do is going to study. She's going to be rigorous. She's going to study this and get a bachelor's basically in astrology, girl. She's been studying this for 4 or 5 years, Mama. You better sit down because we have a little bit to tell you. Let's get into Venus and her many faces. So when we start talking about Venus, Mama, you literally have to start talking about Venus as the planet. We have to talk about Venus as the actual planet and situate ourselves in the cosmology and where we're going. So, Mama, you're here on Earth. You're talking to me with the girls on Earth. When we talk about the actual image of Venus, let's not forget that she is an actual planet in the sky. She is our sister planet. And when we talk about Venus here, we need to consider that she literally is seen and has this context of her sparkle and her twinkle, and that's how the first astrologers and the first astrological omens would have been made about this goddess. So really situating ourselves within that history, y el lineaje, mi amor, is very important here. This sparkle with Venus would then become very important because it is the same sparkle that tells us when she is in her maximum brightness, when she's about to finish a synodic cycle, which is her phase with the sun, and also tells us about her sparkle. Tú sabes lo que es diamante, what is Venusian, what literally glitters, and what we literally use in this world to represent her, all her many phases. The first way that we got into relation with her was by seeing this sparkly gem in the sky, ¿me entiende? Como que ella era la que brillaba. She was the one that literally shined. Don't believe my mother. Now, a fun fact, because we have a little fun fact. I think it's very interesting that, like, the astronomical girls love a little, archetypal fantasy. And the fact that there is an actual omen to someone and a woman who assisted exploration. We get a little volcanic crater named after a pioneering woman we love. And then also, we get a canyon in Venus that is named after Diana, who it is a goddess of the hunt. If you don't know, Diana is one of the many names of the moon. And I love the fact that we have that representation because those two walk together in many myths and in many stories and in also many planetary relationships that we'll meet in the future. When we talk about Venus as the planet, we're now going to talk about Venus when she is deified. And I think when I find the first versions and the first point in history that Venus would have been deified, that my point of interest kind of lurks in beyond the Roman one, we see that it is Venus in the Babylonian lore and her cosmology and synchronization with Inanna and Ishtar. These become one of the main figures, that in Mesopotamia and then moving on to Babylon and the many even different epithets. Even in Santeria, this is called the Los Caminos. And in the Roman myths of Venus, it is called the epithets. With this kind of different deification of Venus, you get, depending on the geographical location, a different cult, a different form, a different manifestation, but always for the people against war or literally waging war when she's in a specific position, justifiably so, against the unrighteous. Don't play with mother. So with Babylonian lore and her cosmology synchronized with Inanna and Ishtar, we get this interesting book, which is called Babylonian Star Lore by Gavin White, and it speaks and talks about this image. The surrounding text and context to this image is, it speaks about the goddess of sunrise and sunset. The sign used to represent sunrise and sunset are an upright inverted image of the sun rising between a pair of mountains as an attribute of Inanna. So, this seal not only furnishes with the earliest evidence of a constellation in Mesopotamia, but also represents the first definitive association of a planetary deity with a constellation. So, to literally break that down to you into doll terms, this image, you see it right here, that you have the same imagery of the mountain at the top of the bull. It quite literally represents the horn of the bull, and in many imageries, including the Islamic flag and a lot of the Islamic iconography, you'll see the same horn-shaped moon with Venus in the center, which to me is so interesting. The religion of Islam and actually the theurgy that comes behind a lot of the Islamic, philosophy and occultism is ruled by Venus. So there are people of Venus, they're ruled by Venus, and their religion and faith has always been devoted and kind of acknowledged by Venus. So I think it's very interesting that the same symbology has been represented throughout time and can be seen even with this image. If you're from Puerto Rico, las tetas de calle, literally, you see the tetas de calle is like two horned, like, and they're called a women's breast. And there's this interesting lore that goes, into this specific part of the island, which I found so interesting because this kind of breast also gets brought up in the Taino myth with the mother of waters who gives and nurtures. Atabey would be the way that she gets manifested in the Caribbean and Antillean, who is the mother of waters and the archetype of the grandmother, also written Atabeiria or Atabix. She is the mother of the Yukahu, powerful female principle when manifested in the female semis, Iguaboina and Guawense, associated with the Lady of the Moon, the tides, and the motherhood, and the universal mother. So you see here how Atabey in the Caribbean gives the same context that the Arabic world and even this part of Mesopotamia would have been creating. But what's interesting is that when we shift and come over here before we get to mother, we get to Maferefung Ochung Yalote mother, literally. Maferefung Ochung Maferefung Ocha, clock the thunder as soon as we say her name. We would have seen the same imagery and the same kind of deification manifest itself in the Yoruba and in the African world and in North Africa specifically, which gives context to a lot of the Egyptian magic, a lot of the magic that we're going to be exploring and talking about the more that we learn how these seven wandering planets, even though that they have Roman names, their entire myth and movement is bounded and found in each geographical location that you look at and throughout different timelines in history. So attempting to, box an astrology, box even a cosmology in which you're looking at these omens and the kind of archetypal fountains depending on the location and the philosophy that they bring and the entire cosmology in which geographical location embedded into their rites and into their witnessing of this celestial movement is extremely important. So we can't just, sloppy. And with Atabey, you see the same mother of waters with this same imagery and these same petal stones. I think it's interesting that Gavin White here highlights how this is the first time that you see the association of a deity and an actual planet. These wandering stars before they got to these Roman names were associated with these primordial beings, and these primordial beings, which then are part of the associations that you get for these planets, also walk without the representation of a direct correlation with the star, which is what we will find with Ochun. So if you don't know who Ochung is, this is a deity that is based in, a lot of Benin, Nigeria, Africa. We get a lot of this lore and a lot of the, her cult. She has an actual river, the Osun River down there as well, but she also gets syncretized into the Santeria, into Lukumi, and then in the modern world becomes a muse of sorts for an American culture, which is insane to see come to life and kind of highlighted by people like Beyonce and then people and the actual entire Black culture uplifting their own history, uplifting their deities, before the Protestant and Christian movement came and did the same thing that it did to the Catholic realm. But bitch, I'm straying. We're going too far. So with Ochung, you get the personification of the mother of beauty. Ochung Oloricha, mother of fertility, mother of honey, mother of the rivers, mother of all sweet things. Her many lures and patakis span and range from saving the universe as a vulture to swinging her jar of honey and swaying the god of war and iron, Ogun. And that is one of my favorite patakis about Oshun, which really highlights and reflects the Venus retrograde dance. In her many myths, it is Venus who lures out Mars and Mars who makes and wakes up Venus. It's this interesting opposition and diametrically opposed relation. And I think that Pataki really embodies the nature and the relation between this Mars Venus archetype that you find in the astrological cosmology. Now, she's syncretized with the Saint La Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre by the people of Cuba. And there's a folklore that talks to us how she was seen in a bahia, which is kind of like, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm very Latina, I can see the bahia in my head, but it's like the shallow waters of a beach, essentially. She comes in floating with a little like tree, like a little tablet, essentially, that says, I am the Virgin of the Charity of Copper. And that literal translation is so interesting because we'll find, here that copper is one of the actual metals that is associated with Venus. So interestingly, the people of Cuba have been venerating a Catholic saint that came from Europe, that came from this Spaniard conquest into their world, which was syncretized. And then you have all of these similarities, which our friend Ficino will talk about latent virtues, but that's, a whole different conversation. And now we shift over to Venus in astrology. So we see here, and I wanted to create a thread where we would start seeing the many layers in which Venus can be found, whether that is through the astrology or through your lived experience and your lived religion and your lived practice. That is the nature of Venus, that which gives and connects us with divinity and with harmony, adorning yourself before you go to the chapel, adorning yourself in your finest garments before you go and do your first communion. That is part of cosmeticos. That is part of the first art of Venus and what makeup was about. The art of adorning yourself before a rite. The Tainos would literally adorn themselves with heavy pigments that were bright and colorful to gather the attention of not only the village, but also of the gods. It brings us back to Picatrix talking to us about, if you dress like this planet, you will be able to essentially get its virtue. And I think this is reflected in a lot of these rites. Talismans that the Tainos would make were only used during certain rites, were used to adorn themselves and prepare themselves for a specific connection, the specific bead or pattern of the bead or representation of a specific metal, like we would see here with copper, would represent a relation to a specific sphere. The signs associated with Venus are Taurus and Libra, along with Pisces, which is her exaltation, where she's uplifted, where she's able to truly get into her tea. She is the beneficiary of the night sect, and with the moon as her luminary, she is quite literally the one who brings moisture. She is the one that creates enough lubrication for connection to be made without friction, essentially. The days associated with her would be Monday after the sun sets. That is what would be classically called the night of Venus. And then you have Fridays, which in Spanish it's very easy for me to teach because Viernes is literally Friday, the day of Venus, so Friday for me it's a little different, but Freya, I remember that's a part of the translations for that name that is heavily associated as well. If I'm not mistaken, in the Celtic realm. Don't get me wrong, girl. I'll be focusing in the Southern Latinas, girl. My man's ginger, but I'm getting there. Also, pearls are also something associated with Venus. That is a classical one that we see with obviously the Aphrodite image that we get in the Roman century times, her rising from the foam in a seashell. So the items of Venus are the makeup, the perfume, the pearls, the mirrors, the sex in all genders, all forms, all varieties. Yes, mama, let's get into her tea. Now, Venus and folk practices. I think this is a very fun slide. I don't think the girls really have gotten into her tea, and I wanted to really show the different ways that people access Venus in the folk practices that I have seen. So, Venus manifesting through ceremonial prayer, incantation, and conjuring, possession brought by rites and ecstatic trances. And we see here the dance of the drum and the way that the drum calls, and going to a toque and seeing the way that the spirits move, and how the voice and the singing, which Ficino would talk to us, how the Orphic hymns create this entire context where each string brings a specific octave. I live that, that's going to toque, that's going to, a misa espiritual, and seeing the voice and seeing the direction of the prayer and the movement of the hymn evoke a specific essence in the room. That is very Venusian. You're calling and relating your voice, your chant, your dance to a specific essence. And that is as far as I'll go with it, but I think it's delightful. Any alejo can go find a religious house and ask them if they can go to an open toque and experience this. Now, someone who doesn't have this more folk practice is going to veer off toward, and I think it's very interesting, may he rest in peace, Pope Francis, praying to Our Lady of Charity, Our Lady of Charity of Copper, who is syncretized to be the same figure who they're dancing to over here. So in this same image, you have a juxtaposition where people who will only accept this form of devotion will reject this. And some of the people that enact this form of devotion reject the Catholic scheme because of its history and colonization. And here you see this interesting relationship between theurgy that I have found myself at the crossroads of, because then we get the European context, and this European context, which is birthed from the Jewish, divine letters, and the Arabic il al huruf, who Dr. Lomi, may he have a good day wherever he is, girl, has taught us so much about, but it is through sigils first and Agrippa. So it was the like the grimoires of the European world that taught me that you could use these sigils. And in the modern world, you get these chaos magicians making their own sigils. And like this is a context of using letters, using symbols, using divine iconography to connect with it. And in this one, you're using the divine ladies. So not only can you pray to Our Lady of Charity, I believe that since Venus represents every woman, it is like literally the women are las virgenes, the virgins, plural, because there's this many different women, different forms, different manifestos and epithets in the same Catholic sphere of these divine women who come and assist those in need. Now, can you connect with Venus? After we've gotten through all of this, you see we built up in layers. Shout out to Alomi for teaching me how to present, girl. Let's really wake up that Dalty in preparation for her big one. I think that I wanted to put seven, considering that seven is the number of Venus. I wanted to put seven different ways that you can connect with Venus that I wanted to quickly share with you, mama. So my favorite personal one is theurgy. And girl, there's a misspelling, but you can't tell me shit because girl, she was, typing. She was feeling her oats. But she's still gonna give you what she wanna say. Planetary theurgy done on the day and the hour of the planet when they're in domicile or in good condition is extremely effective. And dare I say, the most important thing that you practice. Attuning is something that Austin Coppock talked a lot about in his year 2 program, and something that I engaged a lot in. And attuning to a planet when it's not in good condition will confirm what the Beatrix tells you, that it's don't ask her the planet what it cannot do when it's not in the position to do it. And if you go up to Venus and she's in Scorpio, which is where she's opposite her home in Taurus, which we spoke about, you will feel a little bit of the Martian current or a lot of it, depending on the way the sky looks that day. And that's why I'm saying that, doing it right, we'll download Time Nomad. We'll make sure that it is Friday. We'll make sure that it is dawn in the hour of Venus. We'll sit down and say that prayer to that divine woman. We're not going to get crazy. We're not going to go big. We're not going to summon the Pluto portal, mama. No, ma'am. Another way, if you don't want to do theurgy, is through donation. Donating in the hour of Venus. This is something that Austin Coppock kind of really cemented with planetary charity in his course, and it's a workshop that he teaches. So artists, bakers, crafters, small shops own jewelry shops, crystal shops, a local mosque. There we see the relation. Come on, Latent Virtues. And the femme presenting people in the community, mama. You gotta give to the drag queen, you gotta give to the girls, you gotta give to the dolls, the bricky dolls, the clocky dolls, the fishy dolls, already. All the dolls. Now, talismans and things like eleques, things like sacred statues, sacred figures. You see the relationship that some tias and abuelas have to their statue that sits there, forever. They don't play about their statue that they come and put an incense in front of and say their Catholic prayer in front of. Don't play. That it becomes a talisman, that becomes and has what I think is so interesting that Dr. Lomi talks about is this, the prayer becomes imbued in the item. The repetition of these sacred prayers, that divine and sacred prayer from the heart that comes when you're in a moment of need or in a moment of ecstasy and relation. And, you're just living your fantasy, telling the spirit what you need. It's that, and going over and over and over again to the same item, in my personal opinion, creates a sense of a talismanic object without the necessary astral connotations attached to them. Purchase talismans from a reputable source. Fear and Sundry is my personal favorite, you already know. And making your own local and natal folkloric Venus recipes with herbs like rosemary, perfume, champagne, pumpkins, and if you know, you know. But find the way that Venus and this star was seen in your own region. That is something that Occulta really inspired me to do when she did her research on the Pyrenees, and the way that the lunar spirits and the Venusian spirits manifested in those mountains. This is a culmination and inspiration of all my teachers, to be honest. Now, makeup, cosmeticos, if you're here, it's because you follow me. If you're here, it's because you know that there's a crossover between the nature of the beauty and the cosmos, and quite literally how we adorn ourselves and go out into our, little cosmos called Earth. girl. Now, makeup and beauty was the first way that you engage with Venus. You get the malachite eyeshadow, you get the kohl liner made out of the same sacred minerals, like that is where you find Venus. So adorning the body is the original Venusian ritual, and adorning with the word cosmeticos is where we find ourselves en route. This etymology is quite literally the adornment of oneself, and it's very vague now and superficial, but there's a deeper relationship to this. The shimmering of a seashell can get grinded down and turn into an actual reflective eyeshadow. It's so interesting how these things and these cooling things that come from, once again, the moon and moisture then turn into these cooling essences for the body. Now, pleasures. I think pleasures and taking back the reins of the Mars sex dolls, the act of love, sex, and sharing time with someone or someone's, plural, who bring you joy, physically or digitally, brings us closer to the virtues of community, intimacy, and her domain. It's connection, it's harmony, it's sharing of opinion, it's sharing of the kiki, it's the banter. It's mira yo, the banter, the kiki, the cacao with the girls that you love, in the room that you love, with the music that you love, with the drink that you love, with the taste that you love, with the ganja that you burn, feeling real legend. Very tea, unbothered, just happy. That's Venus. Those are our pleasures, girl. Whether it's on the Discord, whether it's at the bar, or whether it's in the back alley, girl, who knows? So, sacred names found in the occult words and grimoires like Agrippa and the three books of occult philosophy, along with translations by Dr. Alomi. And I gave an example of one in my zine, and I'm not going to say too much about divine names because I think they deserve a threshold. So, go find them, girl. Next, and in conclusion, because it was a quick podcast, in times of war, famine, death, and destruction, specifically in places like Gaza, Puerto Rico, Sudan, Congo, Los Angeles, fuck ice, and Sudan, prayers to the one and only that swayed Olodumare to not smite humanity is the one and only Venus. And that is a reference to when all the Olorishas attempted to save humanity, and it was only Venus rising up like a vulture and going to Olodumare, the smallest but the mightiest, who was able to save humanity from its own impending doom. We can't forget the nature of Venus and what a small perfume can do to us. And in modern astrology and the fetish of overly aggressive love, they've skewed the modern lens from seeing the softness in the goddess's touch, prayer, and arrival to our call for aid, peace, and humanity. May this quote from Ficino aid us in these times. Finally, when you fear Mars, set Venus opposite. When you fear Saturn, use Jupiter. And see to it that you engage in some continual motion so far as possible, just so you avoid weariness. And make sure that your own motion is the opposite of the external motions, which are secretly going to harm you, and that you imitate so far as possible the actions of the heavens. But if you can pass through larger spaces in your motion, you will thereby imitate the heavens all the more, and you will get in contact with more of the strength of the celestials, which are diffused everywhere. Go spin during Venus Labor on Venus night in the pastures while the sun sets and the moon rises, girl, and you'll remember it. I love you. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Paraiso After Dark. I will be doing a secret quiz. So whoever listened all the way to the end, you are in for a giveaway where you can get the entire bundle and exclusive access to a very, very, very fun project that I am working on as a gratitude for the support that you guys have brought me and as a thank you for staying all the way through, girl. So I love you wherever you're watching, however you're watching. Have a lovely night, my love, or a lovely day, or a lovely in between, or a lovely nap, girl, or a lovely orgasm. Whatever you want, girl. Besos.